And I think being pragmatic and recognizing that in most organizational contexts, you can't just take inspired, empowered, or transformed, or any of the other great work that folks like Marty and SVPG are producing and just boilerplate that into organizations, because you've got a little thing called organizational context and human beings to think about. And sometimes you might have to go counter to the most popular belief. Sometimes you have to take a more circuitous route to achieve what might be smaller outcomes in organizations that are further along in their product journey.
Welcome to the Product Agility Podcast, the missing link between Agile and product. The purpose of this podcast is to share practical tips, strategies, and stories from world-class thought leaders and practitioners. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I want to increase your knowledge and your motivation to experiment, so that together we can create ever more successful products. My name is Ben Maynard, and I'm your host. What has driven me for the last decade to bridge the gap between agility and product is a deep-rooted belief that people and products evolving together can achieve mutual excellence. This week we're joined by Nick Jemetta. Nick Jemetta is a product coach with a wealth of experience not only in product coaching, but also being a product professional. Nick was fortunate enough to have spent time with Marty Kagan a couple of years ago, and since then has looked to further transform his product coaching based upon the works of Marty, inspired by those around him. And what Nick talks to us about this week is how to really be an empowered product coach. What it takes to make sure that if you're going to start as a product coach, what you need to start strong. How can people make the transition from, say, an agile coach to a product? And between us, we both share our thoughts and our own musings on the ethical nature of product and agile coaching and how to avoid many of the pitfalls that we all come across. If you would like to ask Nick some questions, then make sure that you subscribe to the Product Agility Podcast so that you're made aware of when the Sheave live streams come about. Now, Sheave is a consultancy company run by myself, and we are having many of the guests that come onto the podcast join us for live Q&As, exclusive behind-the-scenes conversations about books that they've authored. So, make sure you reserve your spot for a conversation with Nick Jemetta, or maybe even David Pereira talking about untrapping product teams, or Jeff Gotthelf coming and talking to us about OKRs. And welcome to the Product Agility Podcast. Today we are joined by, and I'm going to say Nick. For some reason I want to say Nicholas, but it'll be Nick. Yeah, Nick, who is a friend of a friend, maybe now a friend too, who I spoke to a number of months ago when we were lining this up because of the amazing work that Nick does around raising awareness of really important issues that I think are tangential perhaps to maybe the core of what we talk about on this podcast, but extraordinarily important. And today we're going to be looking into product coaching. So Nick, thank you very much for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Ben. It's taken a few months to get here, but really happy to be here. As Ben said, I'm Nick Jemetta, and I'm a product coach, a product advisor, and also a wellbeing speaker. So I exist within the product world, but I also spend a lot of time in the wellbeing world. And I think, to your point, when we think about how to get the best out of product people, I think we often spend too much time thinking about product process, whereas we really should be thinking about the human beings. And what I mean by that is, let's think about product mindset, product culture, product leadership. So they're the worlds that I coexist in.
What is it? He said product culture, product leadership,
and product mindset.
Product coaching, Nick, is what we're here to talk about today.
We are.
And listeners of the podcast will know that I have spent a long time in the professional coaching world, studying professional coaching. And I chose to go in and learn about that because I was concerned that perhaps I was not being ethical, and also annoyed at myself because I didn't know when I was coaching and when I wasn't, because I didn't really know what coaching was. And I think that we're in this age now where product coaching is building up its kudos and it's becoming more recognized in the industry. And I think that there is still a lot of grayness, perhaps, as to what exactly being a product coach means. And perhaps, Nick, that's where we can start. I'd love to know, when we think of product coaching, how would you describe it?
Wow, talk about an incendiary question. To start, I love juicy topics. I should be clear right up front that I'm not a qualified coach. That is something that I'm thinking about. But for me, when I think about product coaching, what I think that really means is that on the other end of the phone, or the other side of the table, is an individual that has at hand practical experience building products, leading product teams, and they act not purely as a coach. I think when I think about coaching, it's for me a bit of a catch-all term for using good coaching practices, being an advisor, being a mentor, and sometimes being a bit more directive and being more like a consultant, in all honesty. And I'll be really curious, when this episode airs, to see how the audience responds, because as I've developed my own product coaching craft, it's very clear to me that there isn't really one definition of what that means. But I think at its core, you cannot be a great product coach unless you've had at-hand product experience.
And why is that? Elaborate a little bit for us.
Because I think what a great product coach does is they work on the individual or a series of individuals if you're supporting a team, but without the knowledge of what it means to build products, you can never really make those people effective product people. What do I mean by that? If you've never worked in a team that's done discovery, if you've never worked in a team that's done delivery, if you've never worked in a team that has spun up OKRs, if you've never worked in a team that's run a design sprint, without any of that practical experience, the value that you're adding to the people that you're supporting is always going to be extremely limited. And I don't mean that from a process and methodology point of view. I mean that from a mindset and a qualities point of view. Unless you've been in the trenches, unless you've had the conversations, unless you've made the mistakes, unless you've learned the lessons, I don't believe that you can be an effective product coach.
Hearing you say that has really got me thinking, because when you are a professional coach, the thing that you don't do is give advice. And another way of seeing that is that if we are faced with a human and let's say they've got 3 types of gaps which need to be filled. They've got a knowledge gap, they have a skills gap, and they have a motivation gap. If you're in a professional coaching capacity, then you can't give them knowledge. You can't teach them stuff. You can ask them questions, help them reflect, and then maybe figure that stuff out for themselves, or they can be then motivated to go off and learn that thing, but you're not going to teach someone something to fill the knowledge gaps which they have. At the same way, the skills gaps is something they're going to have to go away and practice. So you wouldn't give them guidance or advice on how to how to build those skills gaps or anything else. As long as they were motivated to go and do it, then they would absolutely go away and they would go and practice those things. And you can help them find ways to motivate themselves by helping them focus on the future and help them understand where they are, all for the process of just simply asking leading questions and reflective questions. And so I think then what we're saying as a product coach, and this is similar in many respects to being an agile coach, is that you're not just there to ask questions to help people reflect. You are there to fill a knowledge gap. You are there to support them actively in developing those skills as well. And that's why that experience is so important. Is it because you are expected to fill those knowledge gaps and provide that support? Or do you think it's because it's absolutely necessary that you must in order to be effective?
I think it's probably context dependent on the individual. You might have 10 years of product experience, but you would still benefit from coaching. Then it's more akin to your question of, well, is it a skill, knowledge, or mindset gap that you're looking to fill? And that is very much down to the individual. You say, I'm a product advisor, because then I feel like it gives me a little way.
Okay, yeah.
Kind of shift and change and be a bit more fluid. When I'm partnering with someone, the 2 most important things I consider are the fit between the 2 of us and the alignment of values, because both of those things ultimately lead to whether or not I can successfully help that individual achieve their outcomes. It's fundamentally down to the individual or the set of individuals to determine, based on the outcomes I'm trying to achieve, how much prior does this individual need about my context. And by my context, I might be talking about the professional product context, the industry context, or maybe that individual wants to find another human being that is either very much like them or perhaps is totally the opposite to them. I think whenever we're talking about this kind of operating mode, if I can call it that, I would encourage every individual to take the time to really think about what they need, what kind of shaped person does that look like, how credible are the people that you're engaging, can you get testimonials, can you get recommendations, do those individuals give you time to get to know them, or are they trying to do a hard sell? Are they trying to push their services onto you? And I very much try to operate more in that space of positioning myself as an expert in many areas, trying to give out as much free content and value as possible because I want to attract the right people to me. I'm very much against pushing myself out into the world and pushing myself onto people just for the sake of engaging and finding work. The work for me has to be meaningful and the fit really has to be there, because I would hate to take money from an organization or a product leader and at the end of our time together, they don't feel like I've added value or moved materially towards their outcomes, because that is not a good use of time for me or for them.
Curious to hear from our listeners, but the impression I've always had in the Agile world was that Agile coaching was often a push onto the teams. And maybe it's just because I haven't been listening properly, or maybe because it's just something that people haven't been sharing. But I can count on one hand the number of teams I can think of that have asked for an Agile coach, rather than that. And then I can count on many hands the teams where I know that some central function somewhere has hired an Agile coach and then pushed them on the teams, whether they wanted them or not, which is very different to professional coaching, which is always a pull, which is much more aligned to what you were saying, Nick, which is, it has to be that relationship, that fit, and it has to be something of value. So if you listen to this and you have been in a situation where a team has pulled your services as an Agile coach, like, let us know on LinkedIn. What was your experience of that? Because I'm not sure if that's the norm. And maybe this is just my skewed impression of the Agile coaching industry. There's a difference here to be drawn between the industry and the profession, because I think that in the same way that professional coaching is a profession, it's also an industry. And within that industry falls many different types of things. So when you think of product coaching, would you say it's currently a profession or an industry, Nick?
Wow. You really are coming at me with these insightful questions, aren't you?
Sorry, Nick. For the listeners, I didn't prime Nick on any of this. I didn't even know I was going to ask that question. Feel free to park it if we want, Nick. It's a heavy question.
I want to explore it, but I'm curious. I'm going to ask the question back because I'd like for you to expand the question so that I can understand what you're asking.
Yeah, sure. So if we look at, and I got this from a book, actually. I think it's from the book Excellence in Coaching. It's like a collaborative set of essays. And it talks about how professional coaching is an industry, because for a long time when you look at, or not professional coaching perhaps, but coaching at least as an industry, because within that there's many different forms of it. You've got your more traditional directive management style coaching, which was very popular before organizations such as the ICF really became well known, which is very much your manager telling you what to do, which is similar to, like, say, sports coaching, where often sports coaches, there is a lot of reflective questions, but they will also be saying, try standing with your foot a little bit more pointed to the left than the right next time you do that. So it's much more directive. Professional coaching came about and it was much less directive. It was much more about reflection and thinking that the person has what they need. There's lots of different shades in between that, but that's the coaching industry. So to turn up and say, I'm a coach, well, that's fantastic. That's like turning up and saying, yeah, I'm a human. It's like, great, we need a bit more information about what type of human you are in order for me to understand exactly who I'm talking to here. Because when people tell me, say, oh, I'm just a human. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And in order for us to get to know each other, I'm going to need a little bit more information. And the same way of coaching, which I think is why is some of the issue when, say, if I'm out for a drink somewhere and I say I'm a coach, everyone's like, what does that mean? Like a sports coach? It doesn't mean anything because it's too broad. So that's what I'm wondering with product coaching. Is product coaching like an industry, and within that there's lots of different shades of it? Or is product coaching actually like a specific thing, a specific profession that you can take, or neither or both?
I think it's probably both. I'd say it's in its infancy. So I think it's still trying to work itself out. And what I mean by that is sort of in the conversation that we're having today, and no doubt continues to have as your listeners' feedback. We're having this debate about what product coaching really is. I've already indicated that my definition will be different to many others. So I think even in its infancy as an industry, we are seeing different shades. You will see folk are truly applying coaching methodologies and are qualified coaches. In some parts of the world, you might see a product coach akin more to a mentor. I see a lot of product coaches that actually position themselves more like trainers and facilitators. Now, I am seeing more and more agile coaches that seem to be trying to shift their position to product coaches, and I don't really make any judgment on what that means for them. I think it really depends on, do they have genuine product experience, or at least a desire to shift modes. But the profession itself, I think, we're really only just getting started. If I look at, again, I'm not that close to the agile coaching world, but I know that from a professional standpoint, it's grown. There's lots of certifications, accreditations. Anyone right now can call themselves a product coach. And I think that's incredibly exciting, liberating, and empowering, but also potentially quite dangerous. And sort of touched on the ethical side earlier on. If anyone can call themselves a product coach, what does that mean for individuals engaging? That's why I made the point that you really need to take your time as an individual or a leader or a set of people that want to engage this kind of human. To your point, get to know the human and figure out whether it's the right type of human for where you're trying to get to.
Okay. Also, I'm going to share a few things, and then I think maybe we'll get into some practical stuff around product coaching.
Yeah, great.
But I just feel really compelled to cover off a few things, all things I'm really excited about. Coaching isn't a regulated industry. It is self-governing. So it isn't like being a lawyer or a doctor that actually, or even a counselor. I think there's regulations around being a counselor as well, or a psychotherapist.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, you have to adhere to certain things. And there are the governed sanctions if you don't do those things. Coaching is entirely self-regulated. And as a consequence, if you go back 20 years before the ICF was around, it was much more like the Wild West. Many people would call themselves professional coaches. Now, if you look for a professional coach, you'll generally look for that ICF badge or some kind of ICF credentials to say, actually, okay, if this person has that badge, I don't really know what that badge means, but they've got the badge, so that must be okay. And you scratch the surface, actually, it means that people are following a certain code of ethics and they've been through certain training and they've proven themselves, which I think is wonderful. And there's always issues with things being self-governed. But actually, I think that the ICF has become a somewhat gold standard. But all the time things are, if there isn't that kind of self-regulation, if there isn't that gold standard, I think it does leave us as a profession, as an industry, open to poor quality coaching happening and things happening which we would like to avoid. And I know that if you look into the Agile world, you have IC Agile, who have done a sterling job at really formulating what an Agile coach is. However, that has not become the gold standard, and I'm not sure if it ever will. In my opinion, far too many people out there who are working as, I'm going to say Agile coaches, I can't talk about product coaches because the product coaches I tend to have met seem to have had decent experience, but too many Agile coaches and Scrum Masters out there have never worked in a product creation team, a software delivery team. They don't know the pain and the joy and the anguish of having to work with other people and come together to create something that works and makes a difference to somebody. And I think that's a fundamental gap. And I think that there are some people who can do a good job without that. But I think it is enhanced because you're able to have a more accuracy of empathetic understanding for the people that you're working with. And I think it's a big issue. So I do hope that if there ever is a product coaching code of ethics or some body which comes together to say this is what the gold standard of product coaching is, that it really does make clear that you need that experience in the field in order to be effective at what you're doing. Because this isn't professional coaching. This is about giving people advice. It is about teaching. It is about supporting them on the ground. It is about being a sounding board. It's much more than just asking the powerful, reflective questions and guiding people to figure stuff out on their own. To further make the point, I think you really need that experience, as you said, Nick.
I've worked with individuals, teams, leaders in lots of different... What was most important to me was ensuring that I was delivering the value that we were looking for aligned to the outcomes that we'd agreed. And had I been in a pure coaching mode, it would have been on me to say, well, actually, based on these three outcomes, if I'm only going to ever be a coach to you, I may only be able to help you achieve 50% of one of those outcomes. And that's fine if you're going to have that conversation up front and you agree that contract, in inverted commas, with that individual. But if you can expand the definition, and this is where the word coach is still problematic here. I'm going to just use advisor for now because
let's stick with it.
Yeah, if you can expand your worldview, if you can, between you and the individuals you're working with, agree in that contract that, I'll be clear when I'm going to switch modes and why I'm switching modes, and I'll be clear on my role versus yours. But by using that more flexible approach, plus pairing that with the empathy and understanding that comes with having been in the field, you go from achieving 25% of the outcomes to 150%. Because not only are you delivering against the outcomes, but very often you're going over and above. And that to me is what is so powerful about twinning at-hand experience with the experience that comes from advising, that comes from working with different people in different industries. I said earlier, I don't have a coaching qualification. I do actually think that would be valuable. That I think the best product coaches, product advisors have the at-hand experience. They have those human skills, but ideally, they probably should have some kind of coaching qualification as well, I believe. And whether that is a new standard, or whether that's using something like the ICF, it's certainly something that I'm thinking about. And I know that many other coaches in the communities I'm in, once they've nailed the first two pieces, that coaching qualification is always the bit that many others are thinking, well, is this what I need to do to get myself to that gold standard and hold myself to very high standards?
I think it does give people the ability to then consciously apply certain techniques and certain mindsets when they feel it's the right time. And I think that for me, I was doing lots of stuff, but it was almost unconscious. Like I just learned to ask certain questions in certain ways. The moment I learned, oh, that's that and that's that. Oh, okay. And this is how, okay. And I could then put things in the right place in my brain. I could then pick and choose, and I became much more ethical, considerate, and dare I say, effective. Because I think one of the issues when it comes to coaching is that our desire to give advice is often linked to our ego. And I turned on the radio this morning. I'm not even sure how this is going to work, so this may hit the cutting room floor. But I'm a big fan of David Bowie, the Ziggy Stardust and Spiders from Mars. It's an amazing album. And so I popped on the radio this morning as Ziggy Stardust was playing, and it started on the line, making love with his ego. And for the first time ever, I think I understood that line. And I think sometimes that when we are in situations where we're with someone who we're like, wow, okay, you're a person, I'm here helping you, and you've got all this responsibility, and you can achieve all these things, and I really want to impress you. And when you say, and you start giving some advice, you end up kind of, dare I say, like making love with your ego a little bit when the advice is landing and you want to give more and you want to give more. And it's this self-perpetuating thing where if you don't understand a professional coach, or you haven't got those skills and you can't put on those certain things, you can't catch yourself and say, actually, maybe I just need to let them figure this one out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm nodding along because that is at the essence, I suppose, of what would separate a great product coach from an average product coach. Because I always believe that in my job, when I'm most effective is when I make myself redundant as fast as possible. You know, my job is not to bill indefinitely, to create the conditions where if I leave, I take a huge amount of IP and prior knowledge with me. My job is to build long-lasting, repeatable, sustainable behaviors and mindset shifts in the leaders, the teams, and the organizations that I'm working with. And sometimes that will take months or years, sometimes shorter. But you know, my intention is that as soon as humanly possible, they should be moving on. Why? Because they've built the skills, they've built the capabilities, they're on their own growth journey, but also there comes a point where the value I can add, it becomes a diminished return. And I will always be really upfront with people and say, the fit and the value is great now, but as soon as one of those things slips, let's have a conversation. And if I'm not the right person, I want to help you succeed. And I've got a whole raft of incredible coaches that offer different lenses and perspectives to me that can help you continue on that journey. And that's quite a scary place to be, right? As a product coach, someone that's passionate not only about seeing people succeed but making money, it's a win-win. I want the humans that I'm working with to be in a better place when I leave them than when I found them.
I think it's a very grown-up thing to say. The type of leader or senior person in an organization that I like, that's the type of things that they say. And I find that when you do that, the relationship is good. It doesn't mean you end your relationship any quicker. If anything, the relationship lasts longer because they know that you're not trying to pull the wool over their eyes. There's a few gigs that I've got into where I've been like, let's do a few months and I'll be off. 18 months later, you're like, wow, I'm still here. And I think that's what's needed. My question to you, Nick, is when you start with a new client, how do you prepare for that product coaching gig? And if you need to draw some context around that to make it easier to answer, please do. But I'd like our listeners to hear your advice and experience as to how you prepare yourself so that, to coin a phrase, when you start that product coaching gig, you start strong.
So I've said already that a lot of the work is more of a pull than a push. What I tend to know is that the organizations, the leaders, the individuals reaching out to me have got a sense of who I am, my values, my beliefs, how I might approach that kind of engagement. But equally, I've worked in product long enough to know not to make assumptions. So before any engagement started, before we're getting into thinking about contracts and payment terms, all that kind of stuff, I always want to have a conversation. And that conversation might be half an hour, it might be 60 minutes, it might be 2 hours. But I always want to understand from the individual's point of view, what has motivated them to reach out? Why now? Why me? What alternatives have they considered or tried that didn't work, and why? What do they believe would make a successful engagement? So trying to understand their perception of the value of us working together, and the type of outcomes that they want to work towards, why they're important, and how that might feel. Because for a lot of the work I do, particularly when it's in transformation coaching, it's not an overnight success. To your earlier point, you might be working on this for 18 months or 2 years. There's going to be a lot of bumps along the way. So trying to take someone from sometimes a difficult spot they're in to what they hope we can achieve together, and then baselining that and just figuring out whether or not they're being a little bit over ambitious, whether it's realistic, or whether actually I think we can push a bit. Those types of conversations, I think, demonstrate the win-win mindset. They demonstrate a more grown-up ethical approach, I think, to the world that we're talking about. But it also means that both sides can evaluate fit. Both sides can check alignment on those values, because we all know tools like and platforms like LinkedIn are wonderful, but until you meet on video or face-to-face, it's very easy to apply veneers. It's very easy to inflate what you've achieved, how you've achieved it. It's very easy to hide behind thought leaders. It's much harder when the rubber hits the road, when you're having a conversation, you're talking about at-hand experience, the strategies you used, how you would approach the engagement, what you would do if the engagement started to go catastrophically wrong, what you've learned from other engagement. I don't believe in hiding my content and my perspectives behind paywalls. I want folks to come and work with me, having known a lot about me and a lot of what I've done, because I honestly think, to your point, that sets you up for not only a strong start, but a fast start and a valuable start. Because for folks like us, you haven't got that long to demonstrate why you're there. You're not trying to drag your heels for months and months on it. You want to show value, you want to be active, you want to agitate, but you want to also respect where teams and individuals are at. And the other kind of aspect of my work that I think is held really valuable for my clients is, because I've worked in at-hand teams, and yes, I understand the thought leadership. I try and be a thought leader in certain aspects. I also like to be super pragmatic and practical. I don't have playbooks where I can literally draw on one page for one problem. Yes, I understand the methodologies. I have a series of frameworks and tools and methodologies that I will use, but they're context dependent. And I think being pragmatic and recognizing that in most organizational contexts, you can't just take inspired, empowered, or transformed, or any of the other great work that folks like Marty and SVPG are producing and just boilerplate that into organizations, because you've got a little thing called organizational context and human beings to think about. And sometimes you might have to go counter to the most popular belief. Sometimes you have to take a more circuitous route to achieve what might be smaller outcomes in organizations that are further along in their product journey. And it's only by having these types of conversations, it's only by doing product discovery. Everything I've talked about is in essence me using my discovery mindset to better understand and build shared alignment and context with whoever is engaging with me.
When you said circuitous route, what did you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is, if you were new to product, say today, you might look at your organizational context, look at one of the many methodologies and frameworks that are out there, and say, if I use this framework, I use what this person said is going to work, and I implement it day one into my organization, by day two, I'm expecting it to be a success. The reality is so far away from that. So what I mean when I say a circuitous route is that you might have to take 3 or 4 steps backwards or sideways or round in circles before you actually start to make progress.
Right.
And it might be that you want to talk about, say, prototyping, for example. But if the organization has never prototyped, then maybe prototyping is not the first place to start. Maybe the first place to start is, well, let's just get a baseline understanding of what it even means to build products. So what I'm trying to articulate there is that I think you should be clear on the principles and hold those principles true, but be very fluid in terms of how you're actually delivering those principles and bringing those principles to life.
Okay, excellent. You also said win-win mindset. That's a Covey, isn't it? I believe.
You know better than me. I don't think know where I've coined that from.
No, I think
maybe it's in my subconscious somewhere.
No, honestly, his stuff's. I think it gets a bad rap. It's kind of seen as like a bit of a management faddy thing, I think, by some people. But so much of it is actually very useful. And I remember me and a friend of mine, Caroline, who I met at Henley Business School when I was studying coaching. We were teaching a leadership team about some leadership coaching. And yeah, we covered a lot of the COVID stuff. It's the win-win mindset versus like win-lose and lose-win and all this. And it's the idea that actually there isn't scarcity. If we believe there is enough to go around, then we can have a win-win mindset. It doesn't have to be I win and you lose, or you lose and I win. It doesn't have to be that way. Which loops back round to what you were saying before, that if we go into a situation and it isn't working, or that maybe there is someone better who can help, then it's a win-win, because you know that there will be other work for you, even if it does mean that someone else comes in and takes that opportunity. You want the right person for it. Your questions, I made a note of them because I thought they were great. When you have these first 1 to 2 hour conversations with somebody and you're saying, what has motivated you to do this? Why now? Why me? What alternatives have you tried? And what will make a successful engagement? I think there's some good tips, good questions to ask. I really like those. I'm going to steal them if that's okay.
That is on one condition. You need to tell me what other questions I'm missing or what questions you're using, so I can steal from you, or indeed from your listeners.
Yeah, my guess is that first of all, these questions will end up on some kind of carousel available on LinkedIn. So do make sure you're following the Productivity Podcast. Myself and Nick to be made aware when we release said carousel. Secondly, listeners, let us know what questions you love to ask, what questions that you help you start strong. My favorite question, because I definitely cover the same questions that you do in various shapes and forms. My favorite question comes from a book written by Paul Barber and Lucy Widdowson, which is a Building Top Performing Teams, which is a professional coaching book. And I'm getting them on the podcast soon, because they're just wonderful humans, but know their stuff when it comes to professional coaching. And they always suggest asking the question, what does the future need from this team?
Oh, that's a great question, right? Definitely stealing that.
And the thing is, it's great when you ask it to the team member, right, or the team as a whole. When you ask it to the stakeholders, all of a sudden, you've just got this treasure trove of information. And I find it's the one question for me which generates a huge amount of insight. It is what I would call a powerful question. And sometimes what I like about powerful questions is that they can confuse people, because then they will say, like, what do you mean the future? And what do you mean need? What I find is once people then try and question the question, if that does happen, I don't take that as a negative thing, like, oh, I didn't ask the question properly. I just take it as they're actually really beginning to engage a higher level of thinking, and that their brain is working overtime to try and figure out, like, what the hell does this question mean? And I find that is really powerful then, because people really dig deep and really think about, what type of future do we even want? And if they can't even ask them, well, we don't know what the future is, then there's a whole other treasure trove of questions you can ask after that. So that's my favorite one.
That's a great question. And asking those questions allows you to both uncover the insights, but then adjust your approach, again, based on the context. That's in effect what you're starting to understand. I think the other thing that question does is it gives a very clear indication about the priority that you need to put on specific product behaviors. And I think that's another thing that in my coaching is that once you understand the context and you hold your principles very close, then it's really about understanding, well, what the great product behaviors look like within this context. Because great product behaviors in Spotify or in OpenAI are going to look very different from great product behaviors in a bricks and mortar business that is only just beginning to think about what it looks like to build digital products. And that's where that more nuanced conversation is just so critical, and why, again, that pool mentality eventually gets you to the right outcomes.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. A lot there. My brain was on fire with different thoughts, because I remember when you were saying about differences between Spotify, OpenAI, and then typical bricks and mortar, when I was talking to Dan North and Jeff Gotthealth, and we were talking about how do you help big organizations compete with smaller product organizations, and the idea, the relativity of it all. Whatever you're doing has to be relatively suitable to your context. But then I think often it boils down for some to speed. But you don't have to, it isn't about absolute speed of delivery, it's about relative speed of delivery. You have to be quicker and more adaptable than your competition. If your competition isn't OpenAI, you don't have to be quicker and more adaptable than them. You don't even have to be as quick or adaptable as them. It doesn't matter. You can learn some stuff from them, but all the stuff they're doing is based upon their competition, not your competition. And I think this is where the people beg and steal, and they over borrow a little bit from other well-known organizations when actually they don't spend enough time thinking about, well, actually, what's relatively suitable for us right now. So the question I was going to ask was somewhere else in my mind. I can't seem to bring it back.
Is this going to end up on the cutting room floor as well?
Maybe. Nick, we've been talking for a deceptively long period of time. And it's been wonderful. So many great pieces of practical advice, some great questions to ask people. As I said, we're definitely going to be extracting some of this and using it on our socials, so be sure to follow us so you don't miss some of that. What I'm wondering then, if we just flip this around then for the last kind of 15 minutes and really begin to focus on, if I am a product leader, if I'm a team and I am looking for someone, because I think, oh, we have a gap. Something isn't quite working for us. Maybe we need a product coach. What kind of things can they be looking for, and what kind of things should they be feeling, which would spur them to then decide to begin the search?
I think getting a product coach or that shape human in is always going to be very unique to the context, as we've talked about. But where I think a lot of clients that I work with tend to reach out is where they're feeling friction, where they're not moving forward either at the pace or in the right direction that they wish to go, as you kind of touched on earlier, or perhaps where they're a bit of a fork in the road, and in the walls of the organization, they don't necessarily have the skill set that allows them to figure out which of those 2, 3, 4 paths to take. And that, of course, is going to be very individual. I think it is probably important to say here that product coaches in general will be most effective when there is a relative level of critical support within the business. So what I mean by that is a product coach is going to be fantastically successful if the CEO believes in the product team, or if the CEO is leading the change to the product model. If the CEO is not in that space, then you've just got to be realistic about the amount of change that a product coach can bring you. And sometimes it's okay to say, well, actually, at a more senior level, we're not in the place that we should be. That's still fine. Product coaches can do amazing jobs, as you said earlier, locally. There's a product coach called Pippa, and I've completely forgotten her surname. So I'm going to have to put it in the show notes. But she talks about this great concept called pockets of brilliance. And what that really means is we don't always have to bring external folks in to try and change the entire organization overnight. We can really look to make meaningful change within much smaller contexts, and we can start to show rapid quick wins, and those rapid quick wins compound over time. They're the sorts of things that I would be thinking about and considering. And it also means that there's a level of vulnerability and a level of empathy and self-awareness there. Particularly for a product leader, it can be potentially quite difficult to appreciate yourself and to recognize yourself, and then to communicate that with the team, to say, I think we need a bit of help. I need a bit of help. And I think that there's still too much stigma that we assume that leaders should be perfect and impenetrable. But the reality is leaders are human beings, and therefore they're on a constant growth journey, just like the rest of us.
And I think that's where having a product coach who they can see as a peer maybe makes them feel more comfortable to be present and open to them, because you don't feel like you're not being looked down upon. And at the same time, you're saying something to someone that's actually going to get where you're coming from. Are you up for a little challenge, Nick?
I'm always up for a challenge, especially as you haven't prepared me for this.
In the Agile coaching world, there was always this idea of smells. Are you familiar with this? Like Agile coaching smells.
I've heard it being referenced, but go on, tell me.
I wish there was a better phrase for it. It's things that you see, hear, feel that indicate to you that perhaps there is something where growth might help improve things. So you were talking about friction and forks when it comes to product leaders, and they feel some friction or reach a fork in the road. And maybe people that are listening feeling a bit of a connection to that. And then they're in the organization and they're like, oh, hold on. Like, I'm seeing this thing and I don't think it should be that way. Or that's happening. And I don't know why, but there's something that's a bit fishy.
Yeah.
And what I'm wondering is if we could have a go at just very quickly and try to come up with maybe a couple of smells each, but we take it in turns. And I say, if I was to go first, just to kind of frame it and give you an idea, one of the smells, which came up this week when I was training people and come up quite a few times recently, is an abundance of OKRs. When all of a sudden OKRs have been sold as this like wonderful thing, and you look around your organization, you're like, wow, we've got like 200 key results across all of these teams, and something about this just doesn't feel right. For me, that's a smell that some of the product leaders I speak to, they're like, is this right? Is this how we should be doing things? And so that's my opening gambit for a second.
And I will counter your gambit with a smell, and let's use that word as we're embracing it, which is where you are shipping and not able to demonstrate value. So what I mean by that is you're in a cycle of delivery, but you're not able to articulate either the individual value of each of those pieces, or you're not able to understand the compound effects of what you're shipping over time.
Great one. All right. I'm going to go for like granular feature-based roadmaps. You've been sold a good and what a roadmap should be. And then everyone's telling you to put all your features on a roadmap, and then they're demanding dates for each one of those. And it kind of feels like a Gantt chart, but you just haven't created it in Microsoft Project. You've done it in my.
I like that little twist at the end. I wasn't expecting that.
That's how old I am. I don't even know if people still use Microsoft Project. It's still a thing. But
I used to use it, so clearly we're a similar age. I don't know how. I'm conscious of the time, but I will go with my second smell, which is that in conversations either with stakeholders, with your leadership team, or with your product team, if we can call it a product team, if the word assumption is never used.
Right. That's a good one.
I feel like we could do this
forever.
A little bit of smell tennis.
Well, no, that's what I'm wondering. I was just daydreaming a little bit, thinking, could we is there a series that could be done on product smells?
That'd be a great carousel.
A carousel, some LinkedIn posts. I don't know, because I'm guessing that Agile coaching smells have been around for a long time, but I've never heard many people. I mean, Jason Knight, for example, does some good, Leah Terran does some good stuff here, which kind of talk about some of the smells, but like a nice little easy to consume thing on just like some common product smells. I think I was more tickled by the name of product smells rather than actually maybe the value of it. Yeah.
There's a great logo in there somewhere.
Stinky products. It reminds me when I was looking through David Pereira's book, Untrapping Product Teams, he has one picture where it has ideas going through a chain of a process. And then part of his thing is saying if you're not collaborating and you're not kind of experimenting with your ideas, what you end up with at the end is a big turd. And he's actually got a picture of
wow.
the turd emoji in his book, and I was like, that's strong, man. And that's a product smell right there. I'm wondering, Nick, we are running out of time, but I'm also keen, I don't want to end it quite just yet. Can we talk very quickly about transitioning into the role of a product coach? Now, I appreciate it. What we're not saying with this is anyone can do it. Absolutely not. I think you need to have that experience to be credible and to be able to act well within the role. But if people are listening to this and they're like, oh, hold on, like a lot of this sounds really familiar and I have got some experience in this domain, and I'm wondering, what do I need to do to kind of transition into this role and be someone like you, Nick? Like, what is it that they could do?
So there are many avenues to shift to product coaching, just like there are to get into product. I think one of the first things that anyone should do is check out some of the content on Silicon Valley, because they regularly talk and really champion product coaching as maybe an industry and a profession, as we talked about earlier. And between Marty and Christian, some of the other partners, they've written some really great content on what it means to do product coaching and some of the things to think about. So I just like to signpost folks over there. Obviously following folks like us, and there are many other product coaches on LinkedIn, I think gives a good indication of what it actually means to be a product coach. And we're a friendly bunch. I'm always open to having conversations if people want to try and explore that as a career. One of the reasons that I was most inspired to follow this career was when I was surrounded by 49 other coaches that, dare I say it, were much further ahead in their journey. I think taking inspiration from people that are further ahead is a really useful mindset shift. Instead of it being a comparison, use that individual as inspiration. And many of us, when we've got the time, are always happy to have those conversations. I think practically speaking, you talked about experience, which I think is a non-negotiable. You also need to be very realistic that just because you say you're a product coach and just because you have that ambition, there's a big difference between saying it and actually finding clients and making a business from it. So think about your individual circumstances. I would never have considered shifting to product coaching were it not for a difficult experience in my last employed role, but also just practically I had financial runway. And we kind of talked about that kind of prior to us coming on air. Being a product coach means you have to build credibility. Building credibility takes time. I would hate for anyone to listen to this and think, I've got experience, I've got appetite, I've got enthusiasm, I'm going to become a product coach, throw in the day job, and then find that actually they don't now know how to pay the mortgage. It sounds quite simple and maybe it sounds a bit boring, but I speak to so many people that are following my journey and want to follow a similar path. And when I start to interrogate them a little bit more, they're at feast or famine stage. If they don't find their first client within 4 weeks of starting a business, then they're in financial difficulty.
Yeah.
And I can't with good conscience suggest that that's a good approach for anybody to take.
No. The advice I was always given was have 9 months of money in the bank. If you're going to do it, you're going to go it alone, have that money in the bank. But who knows? You'll start and maybe it'll be wonderful and then you just got a nice little nest egg, or perhaps it won't. And for most people, you'll have to do the hard yards. I can think of so many people I know that have taken jobs in the last couple of years because it just hasn't worked out for them in whatever change of career they wanted to do. It just didn't work out. It's really hard doing this work and it can be quite lonely. It can be very rewarding. And I think this is why it's important that we find ways to network with each other and to meet up and to do things, because otherwise it's incredibly lonely. And dare I say, sometimes a little bit dull when you're just grinding away on your own. You know, it's other people that make this really enjoyable, in my opinion.
Totally agree.
You mentioned about following a Silicon Valley product group, and we will put some links to that into the show notes. You mentioned somebody earlier called Pippa. Was that Pippa Top?
It was. Pippa, if you're listening, I'm so sorry I forgot your surname. It's post-holiday.
Yeah. You could have just said, I think Ben might have edited it really badly and missed a bit more. I remembered your surname.
Too late now.
No, too late now. Whoops. So we'll put Pippa's LinkedIn URL into the show notes as well. Now, Nick, if people want to find you, LinkedIn, clearly a very good place to find you. If they wanted to learn more about anything else that you do, is LinkedIn the resource for people to learn more, or are there other avenues?
Well, here is an honest truth, and this will resonate with anyone who wants to consider this shift. I've been doing this for 2.5 years now, and I still don't have a website. That is work in progress. The reason I don't have a website is because I've been too busy working with clients and delivering value. So right now, check me out on LinkedIn, but I am now holding myself to account publicly on the podcast. The website is a work in progress and it will be live, so that at some stage I can finally say, check out www.storiesmatter.io. But right now, there won't be much on there, I'm afraid.
That's okay. Well, thank you, God. The commitment is made. Just let me know when you want this. Let me know when you want this episode to be released, and we'll make sure that we'll time it accordingly. Right?
We might be waiting a while.
Yeah. Well, right. So, Nick, we are going to be doing a live stream together.
We are.
I'm just putting it out there now. We haven't got a date for that, but we will let everyone know. So if you want to come and chat with Nick and I on LinkedIn or YouTube, we'll be live on both platforms. We may even be live on Insta and TikTok by that point.
Well,
give them the love. TikTok really like us. We get good traction on TikTok, and we also get some really aggressive, nasty comments, which is good fun. Go on TikTok and check out some of the comments sometimes, because they are class. And we'll be going live. And the topic, Nick, what are we going to be talking about? Product coaching?
I think so. I think let's leave it nice and vague for now, because then we've got plenty of room to pivot.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about product coaching. So if you're interested in product coaching, if you're interested in what it takes to be a product coach or hiring a product coach or any of the things that we've spoken about, make sure you follow Nick on LinkedIn. Make sure you follow the Product Agility podcast on LinkedIn, and then you will know the date. Nick, thank you so much for giving us your ears, whatever you've been doing. I hope you've enjoyed whatever you've been busying yourself with whilst listening to me and Nick kind of delve deep into the essence and the nuance of product coaching. Nick, anything you'd like to say before we end?
No, thank you so much for having me. I hope everyone enjoys it. Looking forward to the live stream.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. You'll hear me next week.